It is late in 1968. For the soldiers of the 95th North Vietnamese Army Regiment, the jungle is not an obstacle. It is a sanctuary. It is their armor. They know every route, every stream, and every patch of elephant grass. They move through the pitch blackness with a silence that unnerves the American conscripts patrolling the perimeter of their firebases. Tonight, the objective is standard. It is a routine ambush along a supply route near the Cambodian border. The target is an American convoy moving supply trucks toward An Loc. From the perspective of the ambush commander, Nguyen, the mathematics of the engagement are simple. He has positioned 3 heavy machine guns, Soviet-made DSK 12.7mm weapons in a triangulated kill zone. He has RPG-7 operators dug into spider holes, invisible to the naked eye. The plan is textbook. Disable the lead vehicle, disable the rear vehicle, and then dissect the soft-skinned trucks in the center with concentrated automatic fire. The Americans rely on air support, but tonight the cloud cover is low and thick. The planes cannot see. The helicopters will be slow to arrive. For 20 minutes the jungle is silent, save for the rhythmic droning of diesel engines approaching from the south. To Nguyen and his men, the approaching Americans are loud, clumsy, and arrogant. They can hear the grinding of gears and the chatter of radio static long before they see the headlights cutting through the mist. The convoy consists of M35 cargo trucks escorted by M113 armored personnel carriers. The M113 is a known quantity. It is a box on tracks. It carries a single 50 caliber machine gun on top. The gunner is exposed. A well-placed round from an AK-47 rifle or a fragment from a mortar usually silences the American gunner quickly. The NVA soldiers check their weapons. The safety levers click off. They are the hunters. The convoy is the prey. Then, the lead truck crosses the designated marker, a scarred teak tree on the roadside. The signal is given. The jungle erupts. 3 RPG-7 rockets streak out of the darkness, slamming into the lead armored personnel carrier and the trailing truck. The explosion is deafening. Yellow and orange fireballs illuminate the road. The NVA machine gunners open up, their heavy rounds chewing through the canvas siding of the cargo trucks. It is a massacre in the making. The American infantrymen spill out of the carriers, scrambling for the ditch, shouting in confusion. From his command post, Nguyen watches with grim satisfaction. The enemy is pinned down. The jungle protects his men. The American return fire is sporadic and inaccurate, mostly panic fire directed blindly into the tree line. But then, the dynamic shifts. It does not shift gradually. It shifts instantaneously. One of the vehicles in the center of the American formation is not a standard carrier. In the flickering light of the burning lead truck, it looks different. It has a tall, angular turret, darker than the rest. It does not have a single barrel sticking out of it. It has a cluster. The turret spins. There is no thump-thump-thump of a heavy machine gun. There is no distinct report of a rifle. Instead, a sound tears through the night that defies all military logic known to the veterans of the 95th Regiment. It is a low, guttural roar, like canvas ripping, but amplified 1,000 times. It is a buzz, a mechanical scream. Brrr! From the turret of this mystery vehicle, a solid beam of red light lashes out. It looks like a laser, a continuous stream of fire that connects the vehicle to the jungle. This is not suppressive fire. This is erasure. The stream of red light sweeps across the NVA positions on the left flank. It does not just kill the soldiers, it disintegrates the cover they are hiding behind. Trees the size of a man's thigh are sawed in half instantly, toppling over with crashing sounds that are barely audible over the roar of the weapon. The earth explodes into a cloud of red mist and splintered wood. The DSK machine gun team on the left ceases to exist in under 2 seconds. The weapon traverses with terrifying speed, the red beam swinging like a scythe. If you are enjoying this deep dive into military history, please subscribe to Cold War Impact. We uncover the hidden stories behind the machinery of the 20th century. Nguyen freezes. He has fought the French. He has fought the South Vietnamese. He has fought the Americans for 3 years. He knows the sound of artillery, napalm, and arc-light strikes from B-52 bombers. But he has never seen a weapon that fires so fast that the tracers blend into a single line of light. He cannot count the shots. It sounds as if the sky itself is tearing open. "Pull back!" he screams, but his voice is swallowed by the drone. The weapon shifts its attention to the spider holes where the RPG teams are hiding. Usually, the jungle floor offers safety. The thick vegetation absorbs bullets. But this weapon is saturating the area with such volume that the physics of cover no longer apply. The rounds are impacting so close together that they act like a chainsaw. The vegetation is being mulched. The dirt is being churned into a fluid. The men hiding there are not being targeted individually. The entire grid coordinate is being deleted. The stream of fire cuts a swath through the bamboo thicket, mowing down everything in a 90-degree arc. The sound is hypnotic and terrifying. It stops for a split second, the spinning barrels winding down with a high-pitched whine, only to spin up again and unleash another 2-second burst that delivers 100 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. The engagement, which should have lasted an hour, is over in 3 minutes. The silence that follows is heavier than the humidity. The roaring buzz is gone, replaced by the crackling of burning wood and the moans of the wounded. Nguyen crawls backward, his uniform torn, his ears ringing with a frequency that won't go away. He looks at the devastation on his left flank. It looks as if a giant hand has swiped away the jungle. The trees are sheared off at waist height. The ground is a churned mess of craters and sawdust. There is no return fire from his men. He retreats into the deep jungle, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needs to report this. The Americans have brought something new to the war. It is not a tank. It is not a soldier. It is a machine that breathes fire. Back at the regimental base camp, deep within the sanctuary of Cambodia, the reports begin to trickle in over the next few weeks. They are fragmented, confused, and terrified. They come from different sectors, from the Mekong Delta in the south to the Central Highlands. A squad leader from the Viet Cong main force writes a report describing a river ambush gone wrong. "We engaged the patrol boats," he writes, "but then a vehicle on the bank opened fire. It sounded like a giant insect. It fired thousands of rounds in a breath. My men were cut to pieces before they could aim." Another report from a sapper unit near Da Nang describes a failed perimeter breach. "We cut the wire. We were moving through the grass. Then the red beam appeared. It moved back and forth like a water hose. There is nothing left of the assault team. Not even bodies to recover. Just pieces." The North Vietnamese intelligence officers in Hanoi begin to collate these reports. A pattern emerges. The Americans are deploying a weapon on the chassis of their standard armored personnel carriers. But the weapon system is an anomaly. The rate of fire described by the survivors' estimates ranging from 2,000 to 4,000 rounds per minute seems impossible for a ground-based system. A standard machine gun fires 500 or 600 rounds per minute. To fire thousands of rounds requires a mechanism that shouldn't fit on a light tank. The confusion is palpable. Is it a new experimental chain gun? Is it a modified aircraft weapon? Why is it appearing now? And why is it so devastatingly effective against infantry? The NVA doctrine relies on hugging, the enemy getting so close to American lines that their artillery and air power cannot be used for fear of friendly fire. But this new weapon changes that calculus. It is a direct-fire weapon. It can be used at point-blank range, and it destroys the one advantage the guerrilla fighter has, the concealment of the jungle. The intelligence officers look at grainy photographs taken by spies near American motor pools. They see the M163 carriers, but mounted on top is a strange, cylindrical turret. It has a radar dish mounted on it, which confuses them further. Why would a weapon used to kill infantry in the jungle need a radar dish? Radars are for tracking fast-moving aircraft, not men moving through bamboo. The mystery deepens. The Americans are using a piece of technology that seems mismatched for the terrain. A radar-guided system for a ground war? It doesn't make sense. Yet, the casualty reports are undeniable. Entire ambushes are being broken in seconds. The psychological impact is spreading. Veteran soldiers are refusing to engage convoys that include the buzzing tanks. They call it the fire dragon or the whispering death because you cannot hear the individual shots, only the collective roar. Nguyen, now regrouping his depleted company, sits by a small fire, looking at the map. He marks the route where his men died. He realizes that the Americans have solved the problem of the jungle ambush, not with better tactics, but with overwhelming, impossible volume of fire. He needs to know what this machine is. He needs to know its weakness, because right now, it seems to have none. Every time it speaks, the jungle dies. The NVA High Command issues a directive. Capture one. Or at the very least, get close enough to identify the mechanism. They need to understand the source of the red beam. They do not realize that the answer lies not in the ground war they are fighting, but in the skies they are trying to defend. The weapon was never meant for them. It was a technological transplant, a mutant adaptation of the Cold War arms race, brought down from the clouds to the mud of Vietnam. 1969. The investigation moves from the panicked reports of survivors to the cold, hard ground of the kill zones. A reconnaissance team from the 325th NVA Division creeps into an area cleared by the Americans 2 days prior near the A Shau Valley. The silence here is unnatural. The birds have not returned. The smell of cordite and wet ash hangs low in the canopy. The team leader, a seasoned veteran named Tran, is looking for intelligence. He wants to know what kind of beast leaves this kind of mark. He steps over the shattered stump of a teak tree. It hasn't been cut with a saw. It has been chewed. The wood fibers are exploded outward, indicating high-velocity impacts. But it is what he finds on the roadside that stops him cold. It looks like a spill of industrial waste. Glistening in the dappled sunlight is a mound of brass. It is not a scattered handful of shell casings like one would find after a rifle firefight. It is a pile, shin-deep, covering a patch of ground the size of a meditative mat. Tran kneels and picks one up. It is heavy. It is hot to the touch, having baked in the tropical sun. It is a 20mm casing. This discovery changes the entire assessment of the threat. In the Soviet and Vietnamese arsenal, 20mm rounds are reserved for anti-aircraft guns or heavy-mounted cannons. They are slow-firing, rhythmic weapons, thump, thump, thump. To see thousands of these casings piled in one spot implies a rate of consumption that is economically and logistically insane. Tran does the mental math. If the reports are true, if the weapon fires for only a few seconds, then this machine spits out more metal in a breath than a platoon of soldiers does in a week. He signals his radio operator. They need to send a sample back to the technical branch. The Americans have brought a weapon that treats high explosive ammunition like water. Deep in the intelligence bunkers north of the DMZ, analysts are piecing together a terrifying picture. They examine captured photographs taken by spies in South Vietnamese cities. The vehicle is identified as the M163 chassis, a standard Green Dragon carrier, but the turret, the M741, is the anomaly. The analysts focus on one specific detail that makes no sense in the context of jungle warfare: the radar dish. Mounted on the right side of the turret is a parabolic dish, labeled in the manuals as the AN VPS-2. The North Vietnamese are familiar with radar. They see it on the massive SAM sites around Hanoi. They know it tracks high-flying Phantoms and B-52 bombers. But why put a radar on a vehicle fighting in the mud? Paranoia sets in. The rumors among the infantry begin to mutate. They believe the radar can see through trees. They believe it can detect the body heat of a soldier hiding in a spider hole. They believe the machine is automated, a robot that hunts without human eyes. This psychological terror is more effective than the weapon itself. When an NVA unit hears the distinctive engine whine of the M163 approaching, they freeze. They believe that if they move, the electronic eye will lock onto them. In reality, the analysts are overestimating the technology, but they have no way of knowing that. They see a weapons system designed for the space age dropped into the Stone Age. They see a gun that doesn't use a gas piston system, like an AK-47 or a standard machine gun. A defector from the south provides a crucial piece of the puzzle. He describes the sound of the weapon not as an explosion, but as a motor. It has to spin up, he tells the interrogators. It is electric. It needs a battery to fire. This detail is critical. The weapon is a Gatling-style rotary cannon. It has 6 barrels. In a standard machine gun, the energy from the exploding cartridge ejects the old shell and loads the new one. If a round is a dud, the gun jams. The soldier has to clear it manually, but with this electric beast, an external motor drives the barrels. If a round fails to fire, the motor simply spins the barrel assembly past it and fires the next one. It cannot jam in the traditional sense. It is relentless. The NVA technical experts realize the implication. This weapon eliminates the concept of suppressive fire. Suppressive fire is meant to keep the enemy heads down while you maneuver. This weapon produces destructive fire. It doesn't just scare the enemy, it physically removes the space they occupy. But every dragon has a soft underbelly. The intelligence officers begin to look for the flaw. They look at the piles of brass reported by Tran. They look at the rate of fire, 3,000 rounds per minute in the high setting, 1,000 in the low setting. They cannot sustain this, a senior colonel argues during a strategy meeting in Hanoi. No vehicle can carry enough ammunition. They calculate the loadout. The vehicle carries roughly 2,000 rounds linked in a drum. At high fire, that is less than 60 seconds of trigger time. If the Americans get excited, if they panic and hold the trigger down, the weapon becomes a useless paperweight in under a minute. This becomes the new directive for the Viet Cong and NVA units. Bait the dragon. The strategy shifts. They must force the American gunners to fire at shadows. They must use noise and distraction to make the Vulcan, as they learn the Americans call it, empty its drum. They know the reload process is not simple. It is not like changing a magazine on a rifle. It takes time to feed a new belt of 20mm shells into the complex feed chute. But executing this strategy proves deadly. To bait the weapon, someone has to reveal themselves. Someone has to be the target. In the Mekong Delta, a new tactic is attempted. A VC unit engages a riverine force supported by the M163 variants. They pop smoke. They fire flares. They try to trigger the American response. The turret swings. The radar dish turns. The 6 barrels begin to spin. The sound that terrible electric whine starts. The ambushers realize too late that the Americans have adapted as well. They don't fire long bursts anymore. They fire burps, half-second pulses of 50 rounds. Brut, brut. Each burp sends 50 high-explosive incendiary rounds into a concentrated circle. The baiting strategy fails because the weapon is too accurate and the lethality per second is too high. You cannot bait a lightning bolt. The mystery remains. Where did this come from? Why does the US Army have a weapon that seems designed to saw airplanes in half, but they are using it to cut grass? The NVA are fighting a ground war, but they are being killed by technology born from the paranoia of a nuclear sky. The disconnect between the weapon's purpose and its usage is the source of the horror. It is overkill incarnate. And as 1969 bleeds into 1970, the Vulcan becomes the symbol of American technological excess, a machine that burns money and metal at a rate that a developing nation cannot comprehend, all to kill a single man hiding in a bush. By 1971, the legend of the machine had outgrown the reality. In the whisper networks of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the weapon was no longer just a gun. It was a predator with a supernatural sense of sight. The Viet Cong fighters, hiding in the hamlets of the Mekong Delta, whispered that the dish on the side of the turret could hear a heart beating through a bamboo wall. They believed the Americans had deployed a computerized sentry that never slept. This psychological weight was paralyzing. Operations were cancelled because a single one of these vehicles was rumored to be in the area. The fear of the electronic eye was doing more damage than the ammunition itself. But in the north, the perspective was colder, more analytical. Major Tam, a senior technical officer with the NVA, was not a man who believed in ghosts. He believed in specifications. He had studied the captured manuals of American equipment before. He knew that every machine had a blind spot, a weakness in its design philosophy. The reports of the all-seeing radar did not sit right with him. If the radar was so effective at tracking ground troops, why did the Americans still use flares? Why did they still rely on tripwires? Tam decided to test the ghost. He organized a raid, not to destroy a firebase, but to provoke a specific reaction from one of these vehicles stationed near the Cambodian border. He chose a night of heavy rain. Water scatters radar waves. It creates clutter. If the machine relied on the dish to aim, the monsoon would be its blindfold. The team consisted of 4 elite sappers from the Viet Cong, the special forces of the NVA. They stripped down to their shorts, greasing their bodies with charcoal and fat to blend into the darkness and slip through wire. They carried satchel charges, but their primary weapon was observation. They needed to see how the beast hunted. They crawled toward the American perimeter at 3 in the morning. The rain was a torrential sheet, drumming against the earth, masking the sound of their movement. In the center of the defensive line sat the silhouette of the M163. It was parked behind a berm, its turret slowly panning left and right. The 6 barrels pointed slightly upward. The mysterious dish on the right side of the turret was spinning rapidly. To the sappers, this was the moment of truth. The dish was moving. It was scanning. According to the rumors, it should have detected them the moment they cut the outer wire. They tensed, waiting for the red beam, waiting for the electric roar. But nothing happened. They moved closer. 50 meters. 30 meters. The dish continued to spin, indifferent to their presence. The turret did not snap to lock onto them. The machine was looking, but it was not seeing. One of the sappers, a man named Hugh, crawled to within 20 meters of the berm. He could see the crew now. The commander was standing in the hatch, wearing a poncho, squinting into the rain with a pair of binoculars. He looked miserable. He looked blind. And then, the twist, the realization that shattered the myth. Hugh watched as the commander tapped the gunner on the shoulder and pointed at a suspicious shadow near the tree line, nowhere near where the sappers were. The turret swung. The radar dish was still spinning, but the gunner wasn't looking at a screen. He was hunched over a simple optical sight, a piece of glass. He was aiming with his eyes. The radar was useless. In that moment of clarity, the terror of the supernatural machine evaporated, replaced by a darker, more cynical realization. The Americans had brought a piece of equipment so advanced, so complex, that it didn't work in the war they were actually fighting. The spinning dish was a bluff. It was looking for something that wasn't there. It was searching for targets in the sky, for high-speed metal moving at Mach 1. It couldn't see a man in the mud. The electronic eye was blind to the jungle. Hugh signaled his team. They had the advantage. The machine was not a robot. It was just a gun, manually operated by a terrified boy from Iowa who couldn't see past the rain. The psychological spell was broken. They initiated the attack. Hugh tossed a satchel charge over the berm. The explosion blew the track off the vehicle, shaking the ground. The American crew panicked. The gunner slammed the butterfly triggers. The weapon roared to life. Brrr. But without the mythical radar guidance, the fire was wild. The red stream of tracers arced high into the night, soaring through the empty canopy. The gunner was spraying and praying. The terrifying precision that had decimated the ambushes in the daylight was gone. At night, without a visible target, the Vulcan was just a loud, expensive firework. The sappers retreated into the darkness, leaving the crippled vehicle behind. They had not destroyed the weapon system, but they had destroyed its aura of invincibility. Back at headquarters, Major Tam analyzed the after-action report. The conclusion was jarring. The radar, the AN-VPS-2, was a range-only radar. It didn't find targets. It only calculated the distance to a target the gunner had already found with his own eyes. And even then, it was designed to lock onto the solid, reflective metal of an airplane fuselage against a clear blue sky. Against the background noise of the jungle, the trees, the humidity, the ground clutter, the radar was confused. It was technically sophisticated, but tactically irrelevant for ground defense. This realization brought a strange kind of thrill to the NVA command. The Americans were arrogant. They were trying to fight a guerrilla war with space-age toys. They were using a scalpel to clear a forest. But this knowledge came with a new, different kind of fear. If the radar wasn't helping them aim at the ground, then the devastation they had witnessed in the daylight wasn't the result of computer-guided precision. It was the result of raw, unadulterated volume. The Americans didn't care about accuracy. They didn't need to hit the man. They just needed to fill the air around the man with so much lead that probability guaranteed his death. It was a war of economics. The Americans were willing to expend 3,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition, costing thousands of dollars to kill a single soldier who cost the state almost nothing to equip. It was a terrifying display of industrial might. As the war dragged on into 1972, the NVA changed their tactics again. They stopped fearing the radar. They started targeting the logistics. A weapon that eats that much ammo needs a constant stream of trucks to feed it. If you kill the supply truck, the dragon starves. However, just as the North Vietnamese thought they had solved the riddle of the M163, the Americans changed the game. The weapon began to appear in places it shouldn't be. It wasn't just guarding convoys anymore. It was being airlifted to hilltops. It was being used to defend remote firebases. And then, the sound changed. Veterans who survived engagements in late 1972 reported a different sound. Not just the buzz of the Vulcan, but a screeching roar from the sky that preceded it. The M163 was the ground-based cousin, but the family was reuniting. The weapon system wasn't just a tank turret. It was part of a larger organism. The mystery shifted from, "What is this tank?" to, "Where did they take this gun from?" The answer lay in the silhouette of the aircraft that were now screaming over Hanoi. The NVA air defense crews, manning their Soviet 75 Dvina missile batteries, began to notice a similarity. When they looked at the wreckage of American Phantom jets, or the newer fighters, they saw the same 6 barrels protruding from the nose. The realization hit Major Tam like a physical blow. The Americans hadn't designed a new tank for Vietnam. They had taken the gun out of a jet fighter and bolted it to a tractor. The M163 was a Frankenstein monster. It was an act of improvisation. This was the twist that defined the late war experience. The enemy wasn't facing a dedicated ground weapon. They were facing an air superiority weapon that had been grounded. The M163 was a symbol of the American military's frantic attempt to use every tool in the box, regardless of its intended purpose. But the ultimate shock was yet to come. The NVA had learned that the radar was useless against ground troops. They had learned that the gun was manually aimed. They felt they understood the machine, but they didn't understand the ammunition. They had seen the high explosive rounds, they had seen the tracers, but intelligence reports began to speak of a new shell, a shell that didn't explode, a shell that was heavy, dense, and punched through the light armor of the PT-76 tanks as if they were made of paper. The Americans were introducing a new variable into the equation. They were preparing for a different kind of enemy, not the gorilla in the pajama, but the armored columns of a conventional invasion. The Vulcan was about to evolve from a jungle mower into a tank killer, and the NVA armor crews were completely unprepared for what a gun designed to shoot down supersonic missiles could do to a steel hull. The year is 1972. The war has mutated. The slow, creeping jungle ambushes of the previous decade have given way to a thunderous, conventional invasion. This is the Easter Offensive. The North Vietnamese army is no longer hiding in the shadows. They are pouring across the border in columns of Soviet-made steel. They bring with them the T-54 main battle tanks and the lighter PT-76 amphibious tanks. They believe the era of the American infantry advantage is over. They have armor now. They have heavy artillery. They are fighting a European-style war in the humid forests of Indochina. General Giap's commanders are confident. They know the American withdrawal is underway. They know the morale of the US forces is fracturing. They view the M163 Vulcan carriers as a nuisance, a weapon designed to scare infantry but useless against the sloped steel of a Soviet tank. A 20mm round cannot penetrate the frontal armor of a T-54 tank. The physics simply do not allow it. Therefore, the NVA tank crews are ordered to ignore the buzzing carriers and focus their main guns on the American M48 Patton tanks. But as the columns clash in the ruined streets of Anlock and the firebases of the Central Highlands, a horrific realization begins to dawn on the NVA armor crews. It is a realization that exposes the true, terrifying nature of the Vulcan, a secret that lays bare the difference between penetration and destruction. An engagement near Route 13 illustrates the shock. A platoon of NVA T-54 tanks is advancing through a rubber plantation. The trees are stripped bare by defoliants. The lead tank commander, peering through his periscope, spots an M163 Vulcan parked in a hull-down position behind a dike. He sneers. The American vehicle is thin-skinned aluminum. One high-explosive shell from his 100mm cannon will vaporize it. He orders his gunner to traverse. But the American crew reacts first. The Vulcan does not fire a short burst. It does not fire a burp. The gunner opens the throttle. The 6 barrels blur into a solid disc of spinning metal. The roar is instantaneous and deafening. The stream of 20mm rounds slams into the T-54 tank. The NVA commander is correct. The rounds do not penetrate the thick glacis plate of the hull. They shatter against the steel. But he has made a fatal miscalculation about the nature of non-penetrating hits when they arrive at a rate of 50 impacts per second. The barrage acts like a sandblaster from hell. The thousands of high-explosive incendiary rounds detonating against the tank's exterior create a storm of shrapnel and blast pressure that strips the vehicle naked. The external fuel drums on the rear of the tank explode instantly, bathing the engine deck in burning diesel. The vision blocks the thick glass prisms the crew needs to see. The battlefield is shattered into opaque dust in the first second of fire. The radio antenna is sawed off. The heavy Deschke anti-aircraft machine gun mounted on the commander's hatch is smashed into twisted scrap metal. Inside the tank, the noise is not the ping-ping-ping of bullets. It is the sound of a jackhammer tearing the hull apart. The crew is deafened by the vibrations. They are blind. Their optics are gone. Their sensors are gone. They are sealed inside a steel coffin that is rapidly heating up from the friction of thousands of impacts. The tank is not dead, but it is lobotomized. The crew panics. Blind and deaf, the driver reverses, throwing a track in his haste. The great Soviet beast is rendered combat ineffective without a single round entering the crew compartment. This is the reveal that shakes the NVA technical branch to its core. The M163 was never just a gun. It was a kinetic energy weapon that overwhelmed targets through sheer brute force. It didn't need to be an anti-tank weapon to kill tanks. It simply erased the ability of the tank to function. But the true shock, the impossible secret of the weapon, is finally uncovered, not on the battlefield, but in the wreckage of a downed American aircraft in North Vietnam. For years, the NVA believed the M163 was a ground weapon developed for the army. But as technical teams pick through the twisted fuselage of an 4 Phantom jets shot down over Hanoi, they find the gun. Buried deep in the nose of the aircraft, miraculously intact, is the M61 Vulcan cannon. The realization is electric. They compare the serial numbers, they compare the feed mechanisms. They are identical. The shockwave travels through the intelligence community. The Americans did not build a machine gun for the jungle. They took the primary cannon of their supersonic jet fighters, a weapon designed to operate at 30,000 feet in freezing temperatures, pulling G-forces that would kill a human, and they bolted it onto a tractor for the mud. This explains everything. It explains the electric motor. It explains the radar that looked at the sky. It explains the ridiculous rate of fire. The weapon was designed to have a time on target of less than 1 second because, in an aerial dogfight, that is all you get. You have a split second when the enemy MiG-21 aircraft crosses your nose. You need to put enough lead in the air to ensure a hit in that microsecond. The Americans had taken a weapon of aerial supremacy and pointed it at the ground. The horror of this realization lies in the ammunition. The NVA analysts dissect the 20mm rounds recovered from the brass trails. These are not simple bullets. They are the M50 series electrically primed ammunition. In a standard gun, a firing pin strikes a primer to ignite the gunpowder. It is a mechanical action. It has moving parts. It has a delay. The M61 Vulcan eliminates this. The rounds are fired electrically. An electric current surges through the primer, igniting the propellant instantly. This is what allows the firing rate of 6,000 rounds per minute in the aircraft version and 3,000 in the ground version. But the projectile itself is the nightmare. It is the M56 High Explosive Incendiary, HEI. The NVA doctors in the field hospitals had always been confused by the wounds of the survivors. They were not clean entry and exit wounds. They were cratered, cauterized masses of flesh. Now, looking at the cross-section of the bullet, they understand why. The shell contains a nose fuse and a core of high explosive mixed with incendiary powder. It is designed to penetrate the thin aluminum skin of an aircraft and then detonate inside the fuselage to sever hydraulic lines and ignite fuel. When this weapon is used against a human being in a bamboo thicket, the physics are grotesque. The round does not just pass through the body, it hits the body, and the resistance of the flesh triggers the fuse. The round travels a few inches, just deep enough to be inside the torso, and then detonates. A single round turns the internal organs into a pressure vessel that explodes outward. It is not a wound, it is liquefaction. And the Vulcan does not fire single rounds, it fires clusters. A soldier hit by a half-second burst is not shot, he is biologically disassembled. The red mist, described by the terrified survivors in Part 1, was not a metaphor. It was the literal atomization of the squad by a weapon designed to blow apart aluminum airplanes. The sheer economic disparity becomes the ultimate psychological weapon. The NVA calculates the cost. A single second of fire from the Vulcan costs more than the annual salary of the peasant soldier it kills. The Americans are firing gold at them. It is a level of industrial warfare that feels hopeless to fight against. It says to the enemy, "We have so much excess capacity that we can afford to use our most advanced aerospace technology to cut down trees." By late 1972, the mystery is fully solved. The M163 is a failure of its original design. The US Army needed a stopgap anti-aircraft gun because their previous systems were obsolete, and the new missiles weren't ready. They took the Air Force's gun and slapped it on a carrier as a temporary fix. It was a kludge, a hasty improvisation, but in doing so, they accidentally created the ultimate anti-infantry weapon. The NVA command realizes they cannot beat this weapon with courage or tactics. They can only beat it with the one thing the Vulcan cannot fight: silence. They learn that the weapon is loud, hot, and blind. If they do not fire, the American gunner, terrified and deafened by his own vehicle, often passes right by them. The shock is not that the weapon is invincible. The shock is that it is a mistake. A terrifying, lethal, accidental success born of American bureaucratic failure. The dragon that terrified the jungle was just a spare part from an airplane, screaming in a place it was never meant to be. The legacy of the Vulcan in Vietnam begins to fade as the Americans withdraw, but the psychological scar remains. The sound of a heavy electric motor spinning up triggers a Pavlovian response in the veterans of the NVA. They know that sound means the sky is falling. They know that within seconds, the air will be solid with metal. And they know that there is no cover, no bunker, and no armor that can stand against the breath of the machine that was built to kill MiGs but settled for killing men. As the last American convoys rumble toward the coast in 1973, the M163 variants are often the last vehicles in the line, their turrets traversing back and forth, the radar dishes spinning uselessly, scanning the empty sky for an enemy that is actually waiting in the dirt. The technological mismatch is the defining image of the war, a radar looking at the clouds, while the enemy crawls in the grass, waiting for the battery to die. The date is April 27, 1972. The location is a damp, concrete Air Defense Command bunker dug into the earth near the Ma River, Thanh Hoa Province, North Vietnam. This is the nerve center for the defense of the Ham Rong Bridge, known to its defenders as Khao Ham Rong, the Dragon's Jaw. Colonel Nguyen Van Dinh, a veteran of the People's Army of Vietnam, sips lukewarm tea and watches the sweeping green lines on his Soviet-made P-35 radar console. The air is a suffocating blanket of tropical heat, thick with the smell of damp soil, ozone from the humming electronics, and the sharp, acrid tang of gun oil. For 7 years, this small patch of the world has been arguably the most heavily defended single point on planet Earth. On the plotting board, operators move wooden blocks representing the batteries of the 236th Air Defense Regiment. They are masters of their craft. Outside, hidden in the humid jungle and limestone hills, is a near impenetrable fortress of mathematics and steel. It is a dense, layered curtain of firepower. Scores of 37mm and 57mm anti-aircraft guns for the low-level threats. Batteries of massive radar-guided 100mm KS-19 cannons to tear apart the high-altitude formations. And at the heart of it all, 2 full battalions of the dreaded S-75 Divina surface-to-air missile system, the SA-2 Guideline, the same weapon that had swatted Francis Gary Powers' U-2 from the sky. Their doctrine is absolute, forged in the crucible of 7 years of relentless American bombing. It is a doctrine of attrition. The Americans will come in their waves of silver F-4 Phantoms and F-105 Thunderchiefs. They will come with hundreds of bombs. The Dragon's Jaw will be obscured by a sky black with flak and crisscrossed with the smoke trails of missiles. A few planes will fall. The rest will drop their payload, which will harmlessly crater the rice paddies and surrounding hills. The Dragon's Jaw, a colossal steel truss bridge built by the Chinese, will stand. It always stands. This bridge is more than a logistical artery for men and materiel flowing south. It is a symbol of Vietnamese defiance, a monument to American impotence. Operation Rolling Thunder, the 3-year-long American air campaign from 1965 to 1968, had been shattered against this very fortress. The Americans had flown 873 sorties against the Dragon's Jaw. They had lost 11 aircraft, their crews killed or captured. They had dropped thousands of tons of explosives. They had failed to drop the bridge. Colonel Dinh and his Soviet advisors, who watch from the back of the bunker, are confident. They are professionals. They have proven their system works. They are the sentinels of the Red River, and their fortress is inviolable. On this hot April morning, the radar screens light up. Contacts, Sector 4. Multiple flights. Bearing 080. Altitude, 20,000 feet. Din nods. The daily ritual begins. Target acquisition radars engage, all batteries fire at will. The bunker shudders as the 100mm guns open up, a deep, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that the men feel in their chests. The high-pitched shriek of the SA-2 missiles launching tears the air. On the consoles, the American formations, call sign Oyster Flight, appear to behave strangely. They are not diving, they are not flying in a massive, orderly iron hand formation. A small flight of just 8 F-4 Phantoms makes a lazy, high-angle pass far out of range of the smaller guns. A junior lieutenant, his voice tight with confusion, reports from a forward observation post. "Comrade Colonel, they have released their bombs, but they are high. They will miss." Din watches the radar. The planes are already turning away. A pointless, wasteful gesture. He is about to log the sortie as another failure when the observer's voice crackles over the radio again, this time rising to a scream. "The bombs, Comrade Colonel, the bombs are. They are steering, they are flying, they are aiming for the bridge." Before Din can process the words, the earth heaves. A series of catastrophic concussive blasts, far larger than a standard 500-pound bomb, shakes the bunker so violently that men are thrown from their chairs. The power cuts out, replaced by the red emergency glow of battery-powered bulbs. A stunned, deafening silence falls, broken only by the ringing in their ears. The plotting board is a mess of toppled wooden blocks. Din, his heart pounding, grabs the field telephone to the observation post. The line is dead. Moments later, a runner bursts in, his face pale and streaked with dust. He doesn't salute. He simply stares at the colonel, his mouth agape. "Sir, it's gone. The western span, it's in the river. The bridge is broken." The men in the bunker, the victors of 1,000 aerial battles, look at each other in the ghostly red light, their faces etched with a profound, earth-shattering disbelief. The fortress had fallen. The impossible had happened. This was the kind of story we uncover every week here at Cold War Impact. Subscribe now so you don't miss the truth behind the secrets. To understand the depth of the shock that rippled through that Vietnamese bunker, one must first understand the brutal mathematics of aerial warfare in the 1960s. Hitting a target as small as a bridge from a fast-moving jet at 20,000 feet was not a matter of skill, it was a matter of pure, dumb luck. The guiding principle was circular error probable, or CEP. This was the radius of a circle in which 50% of all bombs dropped would fall. For a typical dumb iron bomb, the CEP was over 400 feet. The Dragon's jaw was only 56 feet wide. This meant that for every 2 bombs dropped, one would land somewhere within an area the size of a football stadium, and the other would land somewhere else entirely. The American solution, therefore, was mass. To guarantee a single hit, you had to drop hundreds of bombs, blanketing the entire area. This required hundreds of planes, flying wingtip to wingtip, braving the curtain of steel day after day. The Vietnamese and their Soviet patrons understood this math. They had built their entire air defense doctrine around it. They didn't need to shoot down every plane. They just needed to make the price of entry so high that the Americans would eventually bleed themselves dry. And it had worked. Operation Rolling Thunder was a strategic catastrophe for the United States. It was a war of gradualism, of political micromanagement, that cost America nearly 1,000 aircraft and the lives or freedom of hundreds of pilots, all for negligible results. The North Vietnamese air defense system, supplied and trained by the Soviet Union, had won. They had proven that a determined, well-equipped defender could defeat the air power of a superpower. This victory bred a deep-seated, entirely justified confidence. The Soviet SA-2 missile was the king of the sky. The radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery was lethal. Their doctrine was sound. Then, in March of 1972, the North Vietnamese army launched the Easter Offensive, a massive, conventional invasion of the South. The peace talks were over. The previous American administration's bombing halt was now null and void. President Richard Nixon gave the order to resume bombing the North, this time with a new purpose. This was not gradualism, this was destruction. The operation was codenamed Linebacker, and the Americans were about to introduce a new variable into the equation, one that would make the old math obsolete. On the other side of the world, in the quiet, air-conditioned laboratories of Texas Instruments in Dallas, Texas, a different kind of war had been waged. It was a war against the laws of physics and the tyranny of statistics. The problem was simple. The CEP of a dumb bomb was too large. The solution was revolutionary. What if the bomb wasn't dumb? An engineer named Weldon Wordsley, working on a Skunk Works project for the US Air Force, had developed a beautifully simple idea. It wasn't a new billion-dollar missile. It was a kit. A cheap bolt-on guidance package for a standard Mark 84 2,000-pound bomb. The kit, codenamed Paveway, consisted of 4 key parts: a small simple laser seeker on the nose, a set of steerable fins, or canards, a computer control system, and a small battery. The concept was semi-active laser homing. It operated like a moth to a flame. A second aircraft, or the bomb-dropping aircraft itself, would carry a targeting pod. The earliest and most crucial of these was the AN divided by AVQ-10 pave knife, a primitive, manually operated pod that looked like a small torpedo. Inside the cockpit, a weapons systems officer, the WSO, or guy in back, would stare into a tiny, green-lit eyepiece. He would find the target and use a joystick to place a crosshair over it, painting it with an invisible coded laser beam. The Paveway bomb, dropped from high altitude, would see this laser spot reflecting off the target. The seeker on its nose would lock on, and the fins would begin to steer the 2,000-pound bomb, making constant tiny corrections, guiding it with pinpoint precision directly onto the laser spot. The CEP of a dumb bomb was 400 feet. The CEP of a Paveway laser-guided bomb was, in theory, less than 10 feet. This was not just an improvement, it was a quantum leap. It was a weapon that changed the fundamental rules of air power. The fortress of flak and missiles built by the Soviets was designed to stop a battering ram, a massive, blunt-force assault. The Americans had just invented a scalpel. They were about to conduct surgery, and the Dragon's Jaw was first on the table. The scene in Colonel Din's bunker on April 27th was one of stunned confusion. The smoke cleared to reveal a crippling, but not fatal blow. One of the 2,000-pound guided bombs had punched through the steel decking of the western span, gouging a massive hole. Another had struck the concrete pier, shattering its structural integrity. The Dragon's Jaw, while still standing, was broken. The artery was cut. The Soviet advisors were the first to react, their initial disbelief hardening into a cold, analytical fury. They demanded after-action reports, gun camera footage from the flak batteries, and fragments of the bomb casings. Their conclusion was a mixture of professional offense and grudging disbelief. The Americans had used some form of laser or television guidance. It was a technical trick, a gimmick. It had been a lucky shot, aided by a clear day and a lapse in jamming protocols. The Vietnamese, with a grim determination, set about their work. The fortress had been breached, but it would be rebuilt, stronger. Thousands of workers swarmed the structure, and within weeks, a temporary pontoon bridge was operating, and repairs on the main bridge were underway. The Soviet advisors, meanwhile, doubled down on their proven doctrine. More guns were brought in. The number of anti-aircraft batteries ringing the bridge was increased from 40 to over 60. The radar crews were ordered to work in shorter, more frantic shifts, their eyes scanning for the telltale sign of the high-altitude phantoms. Their new directive was simple: fill the sky with so much steel that no laser trick could possibly work. The sky would be opaque with flak. They were rebuilding a wall designed to stop a battering ram, convinced the enemy's scalpel had been a one-time experiment. They would not have to wait long. The date was May 13th, 1972. It was the third day of the newly authorized Operation Linebacker. This was not the hesitant, gradual, rolling thunder campaign. This was a declaration of total war on the North's infrastructure, and the Dragon's Jaw was target number 1. This time, the Americans were not sending a small test flight. They were sending a storm. 16 F-4 Phantoms from the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, the Wolfpack, rolled in from the Gulf of Tonkin. 8 of them, the Iron Hand flight, were loaded with anti-radiation missiles to kill the SA-2 radars. The other 8, the strike package, carried a mix of 2,000-pound paveways and 500-pound dumb bombs. They were supported by F-4 seconds flying combat air patrol to hold off enemy MiGs and EB-66 destroyers to jam the enemy's radar frequencies. This was a symphony of overwhelming, coordinated power. In the bunker near the Ma River, the consoles exploded in a blizzard of green light. "Massive formation, Comrade Colonel! Sector 4! Multiple waves!" Colonel Din, his face a grim mask, gave the only order he could. "Fire! Fire everything!" The world outside the bunker erupted. It was a scene of apocalyptic fury. Every one of the 60 anti-aircraft batteries opened up at once. The 37mm and 57mm guns created a dense, pulsing wall of flak at the lower altitudes, a thundering, percussive storm of explosions. The heavy 100mm cannons joined in, firing radar-guided shells into the heavens, each one creating a black puff of greasy smoke and lethal shrapnel at 20,000 feet. Then came the missiles. The S-75 batteries, their crews frantic to avenge their earlier failure, began launching. In the span of 5 minutes, they fired 51 SA-2 missiles. The sky was filled with the spiraling white smoke trails of the flying telephone poles as they rocketed upwards, chasing phantom radar returns through the electronic chaos of the American jamming. It was the single most concentrated barrage of surface-to-air missiles ever fired in the history of aerial warfare. It was a fortress emptying its entire magazine in one desperate, defiant roar. From the ground, it looked as if the sky itself was being torn apart. The noise was a physical weight, a continuous, deafening explosion that shook the teeth. The defenders, their ears bleeding, screamed encouragement as they fed shells into the breeches of their guns. They were fighting with a suicidal bravery, convinced that no aircraft on Earth could survive this. Miles away, high above the inferno, Captain Mike Bush, a weapons systems officer in an F-4 call sign Stray Goose 03, calmly peered into the tiny, 3-inch green-lit eyepiece of his pave knife targeting pod. He was in the pickle barrel, the target acquisition area. Below him was not a sky, but a boiling black and red carpet of explosions. The shockwaves from the 100mm shells and the SA-2 seconds buffeted his Phantom, slamming it around the sky. His pilot, Major Lodge, held the aircraft steady, a heroic act of sheer willpower. "I've got it," Bush said, his voice clipped and professional over the intercom. His gloved hand was on the joystick, his eye pressed to the scope. He ignored the flashing missile warning lights. He ignored the feeling of the plane shuddering around him. He saw the bridge, a tiny dark line in his green-hued sight. He placed the crosshairs directly on the western pier, the one the Vietnamese were frantically trying to repair. "Laser on," he called. A fraction of a second later, Major Lodge released their two 2,000-pound paveway bombs. The bombs fell away, and the plane, suddenly lighter, jumped. "Off! We're off!" Lodge grunted, banking the F-4 hard, pulling G's to escape the umbrella of death. But Bush's job wasn't over. He had to keep the laser on the target. He twisted in his seat, keeping his eye glued to the pod's sight as the plane raced away. "Okay, lasers on, tracking, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, shack." The word shack, short for shacking up the target, an old bombing range term, was an understatement. Through his scope, Bush watched as two 2,000-pound bombs, flying with impossible intelligence, slammed directly into the western pier. The entire structure vaporized in a flash of white light. Simultaneously, other phantoms in his flight were doing the same. Stray Goose 01 painted the eastern pier. Oyster 04 painted the central span. In the space of 30 seconds, 12 laser-guided bombs, each one steered by a calm American WSO miles away, found their mark. In Colonel Din's bunker, the world ended. The observers on the field telephones were screaming, not in defiance, but in raw animal terror. The reports were nonsensical. "It's gone, it's all gone, the bridge is in the water, they destroyed it all." When the smoke finally cleared, the Dragon's jaw was annihilated. It was not damaged, it was not breached, it was gone. The entire 540-foot-long steel truss superstructure, a monument of communist pride, had been torn from its foundations and lay in a twisted, burning heap in the Ma River. The guns fell silent. The missile crews stood, dumbfounded by their hot-smoking launchers. In the command bunker, the Soviet advisors were ashen-faced. Their entire, massive, expensive, and battle-proven air defense network, the pride of the Soviet military-industrial complex, had just been rendered utterly and completely useless. They had fired 51 missiles. They had filled the sky with tens of thousands of shells from over 60 gun batteries, and they had not touched a single American plane. The Americans, by contrast, had sent 8 strike aircraft. They had dropped 12 guided bombs. And they had achieved, in less than 5 minutes, what the entire U.S. Air Force and Navy had failed to do in 3 years of bloody attritional warfare. This was not a battle, it was an execution. It was a cold, technological message, delivered with the precision of a scalpel, that stated one undeniable fact. The American fortress was the ground, defended by an army. The Soviet fortress was the sky, defended by a complex integrated system. And the Americans had just proven they could go anywhere they wanted, anytime they wanted, and destroy anything they wanted. The feeling in Din's bunker was not just failure, it was a deep, chilling, and profound humiliation. It was the realization that the very nature of war had changed, and they had been left, buried in their concrete bunker, hopelessly behind. The catastrophic loss of the Dragon's Jaw on May 13th sent a shockwave that traveled from the shattered command bunker in Than Hoa to the military high command in Hanoi, and finally, all the way to the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. The initial reports were treated as panicked exaggerations, but as the intelligence and the stark, undeniable reconnaissance photos piled up, a horrifying new reality set in. The Dragon's Jaw was not an anomaly, it was a prologue. The stunned disbelief of Colonel Din and his Soviet advisors was about to become the new, humiliating norm for every air defense commander in North Vietnam. The 873 sortie, multi-year failure of Operation Rolling Thunder, had created a dangerous sense of Soviet doctrinal superiority. Operation Linebacker, which had just begun, was about to systematically, and in a matter of weeks, dismantle that superiority, piece by painful piece. What the Soviet planners failed to grasp was that Paveway wasn't just a new bomb, it was a new doctrine. The old American tactic was the sledgehammer, massive, 100-plane Alpha Strike formations that blotted out the sun and carpeted a square mile with iron, hoping to hit a single bridge. The new tactic was the scalpel. A single flight of 4 or 8 F-4 Phantoms could now be sent to do the work that had once required an entire carrier air wing. This new, terrifying efficiency meant the Americans were no longer constrained by attrition. They could now strike multiple, high-value, previously untouchable targets in a single day. The entire industrial and logistical web of North Vietnam was now on the executioner's block, and the executioner was moving fast. The next target on the list was the Paul Duma Bridge in Hanoi. If the Dragon's Jaw was a symbol of defiance, the Duma Bridge was the beating heart of the North's war machine. This massive, 1.7-kilometer-long cantilever bridge, built by the French at the turn of the century, carried the critical rail line and road that linked Hanoi to the main port of Haiphong and the Chinese border. 90% of all war material entering North Vietnam flowed over this single structure. It was therefore even more heavily defended than the Dragon's Jaw. It was protected by the inner ring of Hanoi's air defenses, a dense constellation of over 300 anti-aircraft guns and more than 20 SA-2 missile battalions. Soviet doctrine had ringed the city in layers of steel. To the Vietnamese high command, the Duma Bridge was invincible. On May 10th, 1972, just 3 days before the final destruction of the Dragon's Jaw, the US Air Force had sent a flight of F-4 seconds armed with paveways as part of a massive, multi-target raid. While MiG-21 seconds and F-4 seconds tangled in furious dogfights miles above, the strike package slipped through. In the command bunkers around Hanoi, the scene from Than Hoa repeated itself, but on a grander scale. The radars were a mess of jamming. The skies were filled with the smoke trails of missiles chasing Phantoms. And high above it all, the weapons systems officers in the Phantoms peered into their green scopes, placed their crosshairs on the bridge's load-bearing piers, and held them steady. The first 2,000-pound paveways, speaking to the invisible laser spots, flew with perfect, terrifying accuracy. They struck the piers, shattering the concrete and steel. The bridge did not just fall. It was surgically dismembered. A critical span collapsed into the Red River, cutting the capital's main artery. The heart had been struck. This single raid achieved what Rolling Thunder had failed to do in years of trying. The psychological impact on the residents of Hanoi, who had been told their capital was an impenetrable fortress, was devastating. They were witnessing their most sacred symbols of power being erased from the sky. But the campaign was only beginning. The paveway-equipped Phantoms became a relentless, unblinking eye, methodically moving from one critical target to the next. The Than Hoa thermal power plant, the largest in the country, sat right